And I will turn things over to Lindsay Pust, our Numeracy and Special Projects Coordinator. Lindsay?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Where Shall We Begin? Planning and Budgeting for the Coming Year. And I can't believe the coming year is fiscal year 24. So time keeps passing. It's crazy. We'll start off with some welcome and introductions, and then we will take a little bit of time to have Jody share with us Jody Versoff from MDE share with us a funding overview, some review, some new information, mostly review, and giving just a time to kind of set the stage. And so if you looked at the slides that were in the registration, on the registration page and the events calendar, awesome. If you didn't, please still stay. But that information, we won't go into as much detail of those slides today, but they will be referenced. We have two amazing panelists with us, Tracy Chase and Eric Lind. We will have time for you to ask questions and have a large group discussion, and then we will wrap up and talk about what's coming next. So the main objectives for today are to review adult education funding basics, to identify data and information that can be useful in making programming and budget decisions, and to share planning and budgeting strategies and guiding questions with colleagues. So not only with our colleagues that are here presenting, Tracy and Eric, but also each other. So please be active in the chat. We are going to do our best to stay on top of any questions that come in, any suggestions. So definitely keep that open so you can be part of that conversation as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Jody to do a funding overview.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. Good to be with you all this afternoon. And as Lindsay said, there was a set of slides shared with you, and those slides, as sort of pre-information for this webinar, those slides are from the fall manager meeting that happened in November, which I know many of you were in the room for, or some of you were in the virtual room. And so at that event, Brad and I did a pretty deep dive into adult education funding and the funding formula and the specifics of how you take that information and sort of apply it to your context and try to start making some guesses or educated guesses about funding for next year. And Lindsay, if you go to the next slide, this slide just has kind of the outline of the content that was shared at that presentation in November. So I know there's a wide variety of sort of experience and knowledge. I know some of you could have probably given that presentation, and other folks are newer and still kind of trying to fit it all together. I won't, obviously we don't have time for me to present all of that again, and most of you probably don't need me to, but just so you know that this was kind of an outline of the content of what was talked about on that day. As Lindsay put in the chat, we will share those slides again at the end. And I do encourage you, if any of this still is a little confusing to you, I do encourage you to go back to those slides and that presentation for more information. You can certainly always reach out to me as well. So in terms of today, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about contact hour comparisons between before COVID and now, because that's sort of what helps us make predictions. I am not going to talk at all about the 4 components of state ABE funding. You'll look back for that if you need that info. And I will briefly just go over again those caveats, the 3 that are listed here on this slide, because those are really important for you to be able to make accurate predictions for what funding what your grant award might look like for next year. So on the next slide, this is a little visual. I hope that this is just a reminder for you, but I do think this is a really important starting place for us for this year to understand how to make a comparison between contact hours in the past and contact hours currently that will help you think about whether in the upcoming fiscal year you might be working with more funding than you have this year or less funding. So basically, what you need to be doing is to be really looking at and thinking about your contact hours from table A1, which is those pre-COVID hours. This is the count of hours that we've used. We used for the 2 previous fiscal years that were used for this current fiscal year that we're currently in. So we've used those pre-COVID hours 3 times now to distribute out funding, and we're not going to do that anymore. But what we have to do to predict fiscal year 24 funding that starts on July 1 is compare what does that old set of pre-COVID hours look like compared to this current contact hour reporting period, which is May of 2022 to April 2023. So that period that we're in the middle right now. And this slide is just a kind of a visual reminder that it's not so much how much did your hours decrease, because what we know across the board, hours are down statewide. We have not gotten back up to where we were pre-COVID as a statewide system in terms of hours. Who knows? Will we ever? We don't know, but it doesn't look at all likely that it will happen this year. So you shouldn't be asking how much did our hours go down. What you should be asking is how much did the whole state's hours go down, and did our hours go down more than that or less than that? So the bar graph on the right here just illustrates that if the statewide total of hours is down about 75% of where it was before COVID, if consortium A, which is the orange bar, is down more than that, that could predict a decrease in funding as compared to the current year. If consortium B, which is that gray bar, it has less of a decrease, or actually their increase is more than the statewide total, consortium B in this scenario might predict an increase in funding. So I know that a lot of you totally get that, but I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. That is sort of the starting point for the math we are encouraging you to be thinking about and doing for the upcoming year. Then on this slide, I think some of you are specifically here for this number. So this is an update from fall manager meeting. When we met in November, we had a statewide total from May through September. Now we have 2 additional months of data. Now we can compare hours from May to November of 2019 to the current year, or the current contact hour reporting period. So May to November of 2022. We aren't quite all the way up to date yet because it's possible some hours haven't been entered in SID yet for December and January, but we can be relatively close with these estimates for all the way through November. And so this is kind of not really much. It's not a lot of news here. Actually, what this confirms is that in November, when we talked about this, we said that the statewide decline was about 28%. Now, with 2 more months worth of data, the statewide decline is 27%. So that is still sort of the range you should be looking at and asking yourself if when you compare those 2 time periods in your program, are your contact hours more or less than 27% down? So a little bit of an update on those statewide numbers, but honestly, it's not really that much of an update in terms of the math that you were probably doing. I do want to take just a minute to review some of the caveats, which are just things that are important to being able to predict your funding, in addition to knowing your contact hours. So yes, definitely you need to know your contact hours and think about how much decline, but there are unfortunately a couple of other factors, and some of these factors may actually affect more of you this upcoming fiscal year than typically they have. So just want to make sure we all know about these things. And I know, as Eric and Tracy are going to be sharing with us in a little bit, they'll talk specifically about how some of these caveats are working out, or they're predicting that they will work out in their programs. So yeah, let's go on to the next slide, Lindsay. Thank you. All right, so the first thing I want to be sure that you all remember and know is that there is a cap on growth specifically in your contact hour revenue. Now I want you to, I want to be very clear to say this is not a cap on the entire grant amount. It is a cap on the portion of the grant that is specifically tied to contact hours, which for some grantees, that's the only portion of the grant they get. For many grantees, that for all grantees, that's the biggest chunk of the grant, and it's the chunk that can vary the most from year to year. But it's not a cap on growth of the entire grant. It's a cap on the growth of the contact hour portion of the entire funding formula. So that cap says your consortium cannot receive more than 11% growth or $10,000, whichever one is greater, from one fiscal year to the next year. So if you are looking at a scenario where your consortium has a lower decline than statewide, so statewide we're down 27%. If you're only down 15%, you may be looking at an increase in funding. And in that scenario, you should take a look at what your contact hour revenue was for this current fiscal year and just know it can't grow any more than an additional 11% or $10,000. And if you are hitting that cap, as we said in November, you should be celebrating. That means you are in the best case scenario for your program. It means that someone somewhere else, some other consortium is seeing a decrease. So that is the first caveat for everybody to keep in mind. The next caveat is this one does have to do with the amount of the entire award. So there are 4 components of the award. Once those are all 4 added together, then the total is divided by the number of contact hours, and that cannot equal more than $22 per hour. If it does, the consortium gets capped. The entire award amount gets reduced so that it equals $22 per hour. This cap, you'll hear more about this today, I believe. This cap could potentially affect more consortia this year than before, because everybody is looking at lower contact hour rates. In the current year, 9 out of our 38 consortia are hitting the cap. Potentially more than 9 will hit this particular cap in the upcoming year. So this is an important one for you to be aware of if you are close to hitting that cap. If you don't know how to calculate that, look back at that other set of slides, which will help you show you what numbers to use to do the math to figure out whether your consortium is close to hitting that particular cap. And then sort of related to that, there is that $22 per hour cap can potentially result in a reduction of funding from one year to the next. There is in state statute a mechanism to sort of protect grantees from too drastic of a reduction. It doesn't prevent a reduction in funding from one year to the next, but it is a little bit of relief if that reduction is going to be particularly large. So how this is defined in statute is if from this year to next year, the total, not the total award, the contact hour portion of the award, if that part goes down at least 10% or more, then that grantee would be eligible for service disruption. It can also be applied at the program level or the provider level. So within like one provider within a consortium that has multiple providers. But in order for it to apply there, it would have to be at least 15% decrease of the portion of the revenue that flows to that particular provider. So again, this may be something that more folks might be sort of interested in thinking about and looking into this year if there's going to be a decline in funding for your consortium. And then the last caveat, the last thing to keep in mind is our statewide system of adult education is divided into consortia. We divide up the state geographically. So we assign every school district in the state to a consortium. So that covers every single, inch of land in the state. The way that we at MDE are dividing out the total pot of funding is we are taking those 4 factors of the funding formula and dividing it out to the 38 consortia. I know many of you work in programs where that are one of several programs or providers within a single consortium. So we just want to make clear that state statute does not say anything about how, once that award goes to the fiscal agent entity, how it gets divided between the downstream providers is local agreement. And that may be more important this year than in other years, because if you've got one provider in the consortium that has a huge decrease in contact hours and another that has an increase, you may need to think about how within the consortium, there's some evening or some fairness of how resources get distributed this year. So those are the reminders that I have for you. I'm just looking at the chat. Wow, that's excellent, Laura, that Cass Lake, you've surpassed your hours. Amazing. That's the first that I have heard, and maybe that's true other places as well, but you are the first full consortium. I've heard there are other programs that have done that, but that's exciting. The contact hour comparison, right? Yes, Kathy, you are right. Contact hour comparison for trying to predict funding is from the specific dates are, see if I will remember right, March 14th of 2019 through March 13th of 2020. That's the pre-COVID hours. And then compare that to May 1st, 2022 through April 30th, 2023. Yes. Kirsten, is the maximum good question, Kirsten. What is the maximum amount recovered? I don't believe that. Oh, no, wait. No. There is. Yeah. I forget exactly, Kirsten. That's a really good question about what's the maximum amount you can recover using service disruption. It doesn't bring you back to 100%, but it may be, I'd have to look back for sure and I can do that. But it may be something like it puts back in 50% of the loss. I forget. I'll look into that. Good question. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Brad. Brad is confirming that. Yeah. So just to reiterate for the recording, so the question is, what is the maximum amount recovered through service disruption application? Is it 10%? Is it a formula-based number, or is it individually negotiated? Yeah, I believe it is giving back 50% of the loss, but I'll confirm and update in the chat if I find out anything else. All right, that's all the questions that I see. So, yep, I think I'm handing it back to Lindsay.
Awesome. And one more just came in as a clarification, if you want
to. Okay, and that recovery amount impacts the amount for the remaining members of the consortium. Okay, so Kathy, that application for service disruption, the consortium must apply as a consortium. The case where it's a single provider within the consortium is actually something we have never crossed that bridge before, and there are probably some questions we would have to answer if we have that scenario. But so far, the only way we've ever implemented it is that the entire consortium applies.
Awesome. Thank you. And please, as you think of questions, continue to add them in the chat. We will make note of them to pause and answer them if we have time. Just a quick note that the next update on statewide contact hours will be on February 1st, the next web chat with MDE. And so mark your calendars. February 1st is only a couple weeks away, which is crazy. Now we're going to move to a time of hearing from some panelists. And again, you'll have time to ask follow-up questions. I'm going to invite Tracy Chase and Eric Lynn to come on camera. Tracy, if you want to start and just introduce yourself, where you are, and what your role is.
Sure. Tracy Chase, and I am the Adult Education Manager for Arrowhead Economic Opportunity Agency. I am the manager for the Northeast region of the state, excluding Duluth, Hermantown, and Proctor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Lind, and I'm the program manager for the Rosemont Apple Valley Egan Adult Basic Education in the southern suburbs. And we're a consortium of just one school district, just to clarify.
And thank you both for being here today. I'm very excited. The first question we asked Tracy and Eric were, what predictions are you making for your FY24 funding? And what budgeting decisions are you making as a result of those predictions? So I'll turn it over to Tracy to first answer this question.
Okay. I want to say first that I am very happy for my neighbor, Laura, for doing so well with the contact hours. I wish that I could say I was celebrating, but at this point, I am looking at worst case scenario. We are down greatly. We're probably going to be down about 45%. And that's actually being quite generous in my prediction. I'm optimistic, but it's still not going to look good. And one of the issues that AUA's adult ed program has is that we are already capped. We are one of those 9 programs that are capped. And so this just is kind of like a double whammy. So I have a feeling we're going to be losing quite a bit of funding. A good thing, I guess you could say, is with the fiscal year 23 budget, last year we were able to bring our budget for the July 1st through the following September 30th. So we do have some of those funds that we will be able to use for wage and fringe. So that is a good thing. I will be looking at summer programming for the summer, who is going to remain on, what types of classes are we going to be providing. One of the things of being a community action program versus, we're tied to the school districts, but our fiscal agent is a CAP agency. And one of our issues is the difference of how we are able to do things. So a typical K-12 position or ABE position would be, say, like a 9 or 10 month position. With AEOA, we don't have that. Even though I put it out as a 9-month or a 10-month position for those in smaller programs, if it isn't a 12-month program, technically they are laid off. And so I'm trying to do a workaround where in the summer months, for some of the small programs, I might have them do a bit of professional development each pay period, so I can keep them on the rolls and I'm not having to put them into layoff status. One of the things that years ago, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Joan Kroltz, a former adult ed manager, but she had implemented a 60% rule. And what it was is that staff needed to be working towards, in their contact hours, pay for 60% of their wage, in contact hours. And with our funding, we do receive the LEP count and the no diploma and the school district, and all of that. But trying to get at least through contact hours 60%. And so right now that is what we are trying to reach, or at least have staff be working towards that. I don't know how many of the programs around the state have the same situation as I do, in that quite a few of the new employees came on during COVID. And so there's maybe a different mindset in regards to marketing and getting people into the classrooms, and it's a very different dynamic. And so I'm trying to do something to help with that. Potentially, I'm looking at maybe some program service cuts, such as I'm looking at low cost or no cost rent, for some of the classrooms. Maybe paying attention to costs such as photocopying, curriculum, telephone, those types of costs, of trying to make some reductions. I am keeping the service disruption in the back of my mind, because I may need to tap into that. With our extra 21 funding, I had purchased quite a bit in regards to marketing supplies, such as banners and like yard signs and things of that nature, that we are really trying to push out and to market our program. We've also had a change up in the career force in my neck of the woods. And so trying to work around that, kind of is interesting. And then I also, going back, with being the CAP agency, I receive encumbrance reports every 2 weeks that I really pay attention to, in regards to, how are we doing with funding? Where am I at with wage and fringe? Where am I at with, the program service costs and things of that nature? And I do know we probably are going to have a wage increase, and I know the fringe will be increasing with our medical and dental. So I have to be cognizant of that too. So those are some of my predictions and some of my budgeting decisions of what I'm going to be looking at because of it.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I'll turn it over to Eric, and then after Eric shares, we'll have time for Q&A.
All right, some of the predictions that starting to make. Well, one we'll know more once Metro North. I know they contacted us a couple of weeks ago that they usually do that contact hour prediction for the next year. It's usually pretty accurate, so be looking forward to that. But just looking at the overall rates, I had looking at the 28% September, it sounds like it's 27 now, so it's not much different. We're getting closer to our pre-COVID numbers. We're just down 6% right now, so our program's in pretty good shape. So it looks like we should be able to get the full 11% increase in the contract hour funds. So for us, that would be 61,000. So we're in good shape. Looks like we'll be in good shape for next year revenue wise. And then just starting to think a little, in the next part, we'll talk a little bit more about what we're thinking about that, but just some of the things, the areas that we're seeing the most growth is evening, EL and especially beginning level EL classes. So, possibly looking at another EL teacher. We also our teachers are on the district contract. So they're highly paid. So we'll have to, and with inflation and everything, we're expecting that the new contract for next year is going to see some increases for them. So, a big chunk of that will probably go towards that. And then we had a little bit of carryover from our 322 and Fin 166 from last year that we used for some staffing that we'll need to use. We won't have that next year. So that's just some of the projections revenue wise.
Thanks, Eric and Tracy. We have a few minutes here to take some questions about anything that was just shared. It looks like we do already have one question. It looks like specifically directed at Tracy from Dwayne. If the gross revenue cap went to 30 from the current 22, how much would that help your program?
It would help definitely, because we were capped. What we had received the last time, our contact hour rate was $22.24, and so we were capped, with those 24 cents per for that funding. And this time around, if I was just generalizing, we're going to be a little over 30, so 30 would help immensely.
Okay. Great. Other questions? Comments, reflections on what was just shared? Not seeing other questions. Lindsay, should we keep moving?
Yeah, let's move to the next
Okay.
question. So the next question we posed, what data or information are you considering as you are budgeting and planning for next year? So I'll invite Tracy to come back on to answer that question.
Okay. And so I am paying attention every week. I go into SID and I'm looking at that contact hours of where we are sitting and, for our program. And I'm also looking at, with the federal and state budgets of how those contact hours could potentially, with the rate of what that could amass. I am looking also of doing some potential work. Our agency is applying for a federal youth build, and I know Laura's program has really benefited from the federal youth build program. We have a state one, but this is a federal, and we would be looking at Itasca County in the Grand Rapids area and also in Hibbing, so that there's potential to partner and to increase some of the funding. We take part in a SNAP outreach every year, and it's not a lot of money, but every dollar helps. We do SNAP 50-50. And also with Minnesota North, they had applied for a federal like $5 million grant or whatever, did not receive it. But it sounds like they are going to get some type of funding, and with that they're wanting to increase some of the programming that adult ed does on the Minnesota North campuses. And so I've been working with a person, Jesselyn Sabin, about that potential. So we're looking for extra dollars for sure. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, with the staff increase in wage and fringe, we have not heard yet what the increase is. I have requested a new wage and fringe chart so I can, look at the potential of what type of costs just for staffing that I would have. Right now, of course, like most of you guys, the majority of our award letter goes for staff wage and fringe. And then I would be looking at, the program services, what can we cut? How can we stretch those dollars? I will be looking at Metro North to see with their compilation, just to kind of get an idea. We do receive RTC funds, regional transitions funds, that I share with Angie Frank, the Duluth program manager. And we're going to be looking at site hours. Do we combine classes? What about distance learning? How many students are taking advantage of distance learning? Can we get more students on learning platforms? So those things will be considered. What can we do to stretch our dollars so that way at least we could potentially limp through this next year?
Thank you so much. Eric.
So the data that I've been looking at is well, first, just our own program contact hours, which I mentioned we're down 6%. So we're pretty happy with that. And then the state contract hours overall and the projections, and also at our rate, we had been the contact hour, we'd been capped at 746 versus I think it's like 778 I had down. So we're a little below there. So that also gives us a little bit more room for growth on the contact hour revenue side. And then, you know, potentially, are we going to get any funds from our regional transitions plan for any projects? We're lucky that we're included in our district tech levy. So we'll get some money, trying to get some money for some from like Chromebook labs for our classrooms, and we'll look at how much we get from that. And then we did start up the student material fee again this year. We've been not charging that and on the last couple of years, but this year, since we're more back in person, we're bringing that back on. We brought that back on, so I'll kind of look to see how much we got in that. So that's for revenue. Expenditures, well, I'll definitely have to look at the staffing, because we've kept pretty much the same staffing level, but our revenue has been frozen the last few years. We're getting, we'll look at, and it sounds like that's even going to be increase a lot this year with the inflation, and we'll have a pretty good projection. We do our budget end of March, beginning of April, around that time, and our district uses my budget file, and our district office always projects all of our staffing automatically. What they project will be the new amount with the contract. So we've got pretty accurate projections with that. And then we're going to look at any changes of staffing, potential retirements, things like that. And then other expenditure projections. We use Skyward for our accounting, and look at that, see what's just some glancing at this so far this year. It looks like things are up. Some of our utilities costs and stuff like that seem to be going up this year, and paper costs a lot. So copier, things like that. So look at the effect of inflation on those things. And then finally, our programming needs. We're looking at enrollment trends closely, and as I mentioned before, it's been our level 1 that we've been seeing the biggest increase. We actually have a waiting list in that level, so we need to figure out how to work that out. But then other classes do our core EL and GD classes, but then also our special classes. What are we seeing? How is it comparing at our different sites? In person, online, we're still offering one online class for each level in the morning and evening, and those are still going pretty strong. Those are popular classes. Yeah, so we'll look at some of the data. We'll look at the overall contact hours. Always watch the head counts of our different classes. Look at our waiting list, how long are students on the list. If there are things that can be adjusted that way. Look at level gain data. Are there things that we need to put some focus on? And then if there's any potential new partnerships, for example, been hearing recently about that new Minnesota Ability to Benefit plan. Is there any potential for a partnership, something like that? I think that's it. Yeah.
Thanks, Eric and Tracy. So we'll pause here again for questions. Invite you to put those in the chat. You can also raise your hand and we can take those orally. I just want to note that we have a number of people chiming in the chat about the gross revenue per contact hour cap, and that raising that would be helpful. I'd like to invite, if there's someone on the webinar today from LAN who would like to speak to how the caps are being addressed in the LAN legislative platform, we could give you a moment to do that. I'd like to raise your hand. Or in the chat, you give an update in the chat as well.
Hey, Astrid, Susie. I'm looking
Susie,
for
thanks.
the little hand raising button, but I can't find it.
Okay.
I don't know where I am on Zoom or whatever.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for LAN, for the legislative platform, we are asking for that increase in contact hour revenue. We're also asking to make sure that if there is increased funding for ABE, that we understand that they have to be funded mandates. If teachers are going to get paid more, we have to have money behind ABE. So we're making sure that those are clear with our lobbyist. Wendy is finishing up the one sheeter with our platforms on it to make sure that that is easy for everybody to understand. So if I misspoke, just wait for the email from Wendy to come out. And then that was from the LAN point of view. And then for a follow-up question, I have for Eric, especially right now, we're kind of in the boat where we could add some programming because we have people interested. However, we are looking at hitting our cap to exceed our contact hours, what we would get funded for. So I'm wondering if Eric or anybody else on the call is in that situation where they're kind of sitting on the fence wondering, should I, create this new class and have potential 20 more learners joining us, knowing that we're going to hit our contact hour goal of the 11% and more. And I hate to say that when I know other people on here are struggling for contact hours, but I'm trying to be so careful and fiscally responsible that I'm kind of in a strange place right now where I'm not sure what to do.
Good question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in the same way a little bit too, because I know our teacher costs are going to go way up next year. And yeah, just like adding a new teacher right now. Well, first of all, we haven't budgeted for it for this year anyway. And then, if I want to sort of see where everything like comes out too. So yeah, that's I've struggled with that a little bit too, about when you make mid-year changes versus kind of at something that you budgeted through for the year.
Anyone else want to respond to that question? Anyone who's in a similar situation, either in the chat or raising your hand?
I just have to say, with Susie, that I think it's wonderful that you are way up. I think that's, I wish my program was too, but I can't feel bad that you are, because you've worked hard, for that. And you found that niche to be able to do that. And I just have to find that and be able to replicate it. So that way we can be doing those same things. And
Susie, is it English language learners? Is that where your growth is?
It's a little bit of everything, but Tracy, just back to you, it's really the team has, we made the goal of outreach this year. And so right now we're finding sober houses, and some of those group homes are looking at GED and some of the life skill classes and places. So if we had a teacher that would go in and do a class with 8 people kind of on site, we have those opportunities. I just don't want to open up a whole bunch of doors to say, oh, and then next year we're broke, so sorry, we're gonna have a yard sale. So those are some of the things, Tracy, that I have to give credit to. I've got some really energetic people just out there at some of our basic needs or Hastings Family Service, places like those, where we're just paying them to be present to win is how I think of it. And then more conversations coming out of that.
I would love to also get ideas, for people around the state to share of those types of places. One of the issues that we have is because we are so, we have a lot of miles between places. Sometimes that's difficult, but I would still love to hear ideas of where people tapping into with some of those new resources. I think that would be really beneficial for me in my program.
So if people do have suggestions or things that are working for them, please do put those in the chat. We'll also might have a little time at the end to share some of those ideas. And I think, Tracy, it's also, I think there are a variety of factors that go into contract hour trends, and certainly there's a lot of diversity across the state in terms of your geography and student populations and employment rates and everything. So I think some of it's in our control and some of it is not. Any other questions before we move to the next question for our panelists? Lindsay, should we go on to the next question?
Sounds good. The next question we asked, the last question actually, and then we will open it up. Astrid, should we pause and answer this question first? Talk about this question that just came in?
Yes, let's
Okay.
pause.
So the question is it possible the cap would change before the next funding year?
I wonder if Jody wants to respond to that one.
Yeah, sure. So as Susie mentioned, on the land legislative platform is a proposal to raise okay, remember there's more than one cap, but I believe, Kristen, that the cap you are talking about is the $22 per hour gross revenue cap. And there's a proposal, to be hopefully moved forward at the legislature this session that would raise that from 22. I forget if it's raising it to 28 or 30, one of those two. And so if legislators act on that, if there is a bill that gets authored and goes through committee and makes it to the floor and gets a vote and it gets passed and the governor signs it, yes, that could affect funding for that starts in July 1. If the legislature goes into special session and it hasn't passed, then we could get into a weird situation if it's still sort of pending at that point. But yes, it is possible it could change for the upcoming year's funding.
Thank you. Yeah, that was very, very helpful.
Jody, only 13 easy steps to get that funding passed. And so the only other piece that I wanted to mention was that Governor Walz does have a stance right now that he's speaking about, how important it is to fund education, so that we're feeling encouraged. So keep hopeful.
Thank you for sharing. The next question we asked, what new things are you planning or hoping to fund and why? And what are you going to discontinue and why? So I'll invite Tracy to come back on.
Okay. But first, before I have to ask, when was the last time we would have received like a cost of living increase for adult ed?
I don't believe that there's really any mechanism for us to receive a cost of living increase for adult ed. The way state statute is currently written, the only increase to the entire pot of adult ed funding is when our 10-year total of contact hours statewide goes up. And we're not in it. That's an impossibility for quite a while now. So we have state statute doesn't define any cost of living increase for us.
I think about that because all of our programs, everything goes up with inflation and all that. So wage and fringe and program services, everything goes up. So it's interesting that our funding isn't keeping, up with that same thing. Okay, so new things, planning, hoping, funds, and all that. We're going to continue, of course, the relationship with Minnesota North. They have been a huge influence with our program. And so we will continue and with that. And I'm thinking about hiring a part-time person from the McGregor-Aiken area, because right now I do pay mileage for a staff person to go there in person. And so I'm kind of looking at doing some of that. Again, going back to that extra funding that we had in the past, I purchased a lot of technology and updated technology. And so this is an opportunity for us to be doing more of that hybrid and more of that distance learning and all of that. Of just getting more into that habit. And so, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. So at this time, I'm really not looking for doing anything drastic unless that worst case scenario happens and I don't have a choice. So so Minnesota North. Oh, and also we've been working with a couple potential businesses. One is out of Grand Rapids with it used to be the all-season vehicle ASV, and I know that they were going to be hiring like 150 welders or 120 some welders or whatever in the next year or so. And so I've been in discussions of maybe doing helping with some of that training, some of that testing in regards to academic levels and all of that. And also with a couple of businesses in Hibbing. So fingers are crossed that we can generate some more funding too.
Thank you very much. Eric.
All right, so as I mentioned earlier, our big trend this year is a big increase in level 1 English learners, both our morning and evening, and then, but especially our evening numbers have really increased. So, a couple of potential solutions would be the obvious one would be to hire additional teacher if the trend continues. But the other is just can we shift our staffing, because it's definitely seeing a more increase of level 1. So is there a way to kind of shift how we do levels? But that can be challenging too. And then are there any new partnerships? Like, for example, I mentioned the DCTC, Minnesota Ability to Benefit, or with any other community partners or employers. And then we've had a lot of new staff in the last few years. So we'd like to look into doing additional PD for our new and relatively new staff. And then the next slide. Overall, we look at doing no major, like similar to Tracy, it's no major changes at this time. It's more just like shifts of focus of resources and staffing. Can we do some shifting of the classes to better balance things out? Looking at changes to special classes, we always look at our special classes or online classes. Are there different topics, times, dates, delivery, recruitment, that kind of thing? And then just other areas of potential savings, with tech or textbook or supplies with some of those inflation costs. I think that's it.
Thank you. So what questions do folks have about the plans that Eric and Tracy have for changes in the coming year? It sounds like you're both taking a similar approach of no big changes.
Can I just ask a question?
Absolutely.
And I don't really know if it has to do with I just have 2 questions. So the actual state funding though really is not going to change. I mean, it is if we go back to contact hours, but the amount of money that the state of Minnesota is going to get is not really it's not going to decrease, correct? That we got last year.
We have no indication that it will.
Okay, so I'm just throwing this out. So really, if you go strictly by contact hours, like we're proposing, you're and some sites will get more because their contact hours are up, but you're gonna have to figure out what to do with all that extra money that's not going for contact hours, correct? Do you know what I'm asking you? You're still gonna have the same amount of money. It's like, but if everyone only has, say, 300,000, I'm making numbers up now, 300,000 contact hours, but everyone only has 200,000 contact hours, you're still going to have a pot of money that 100,000 contact hours needs to go out, right or not?
No, because
that's what I want to know.
Sure. So MDE will have a pot of about 50 million. That's the total pot.
Okay.
And 3% off the top goes to supplemental services to support the support network stuff, right? Atlas and these things like we're doing today. The rest of it gets distributed out to grantees, and we divide it up using the 4 factors. So first we send some of it out based on population of the area you serve, right?
Right. Yep.
And then what's left in the pot, we divide up into 3 chunks. 84% of that goes into contact hours, and then a little 8% goes into the LEP count, and 8% goes into the over 25 no diploma. So it just means that 84% of whatever's left will get divided by however many contact hours there are. So the value of each contact hour, if there are fewer hours, the value of each hour goes up.
Okay, that's what and I probably should know the answer to this, but who determines what the amount of the contact hour will be?
It's just math.
It's just math. So you will take the total contact divided by.
we have how many, after we take out the amount that we just
Okay.
figured out based on population, 84% of what's left, we just divide it by the total number of contact hours generated in the year. And
Okay.
that, whatever that math works out to be, that's the contact hour rate.
So right now, everyone who's doing this is assuming the contact hour is gonna say that, I mean, when we're figuring this out, from what I'm hearing from people is everyone assuming that the contact hour is gonna stay, I mean, they're basing their funding on the same as what it was last year, but in reality, that contact hour could increase.
Oh, the contact hour rate will
Right.
definitely increase.
Right. So I mean, even though you're
But-
down, I mean, I'm not trying to dismiss that at all, but the contact hour is definitely gonna increase. So even though if your hours are down, you're not gonna lose as much as you did this, if you were just looking at this year.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
What you're saying, Penny, is another way of what I was saying, that you don't look at just how much your hours are down. Look at how close are you to the amount that the hours are down statewide.
Right.
Everybody's down. The amount, the contact hour rate will go up. It's just,
Right.
will it go up enough to make up the difference for you?
Right.
Is the question.
And then my other question is, just because my brain works a little goofier probably than most people, but when we're comparing the March to the March, now to me, when it make more sense, like for the pre-COVID, since we're looking at going back to, like right now, if I wanted to compare my site hours, I went 5/1/19 to like 12/31/19. That would tell me what I was. And then I would do 5/1/22 to 12/31/22. Isn't that going to give me more of what I was pre-COVID? You know what, when you're throwing in those March dates, we're kind of not comparing apples to apples, are we?
The problem is, we used those March to March. That is the year's worth of data that we used. So what I'm trying to do is give us as much of a year, as close to a year as possible.
Okay.
So if you compare May, if you compare,
Do you know what I'm saying? So when
yeah,
I'm
no, I
doing
do know
March-
what you're saying. Actually, no, sorry, you are saying the same thing as I'm saying. Yeah, you can compare,
Right?
yeah, you compare May through December at this point. Yes, that's what you should be
And then,
doing.
yes, and then I was comparing May, because to me, that makes more sense because I'm trying to figure out, it was the pre-COVID year. So to me, I'm comparing pre-COVID to current. And to me, that's matching my more what I was before COVID and what I am current, because that's kind of what we're looking at, even though we're looking at different hours. Am I totally off the base from doing that?
Right, we're saying compare May through December, or I only have statewide hours through November, but you might have May through December for your site.
Right. So I'm looking at May 1st of 19 to 12/31 of 19. That was before COVID. There was no disruption there. And
Right.
then I'm doing May 1 of this year to 12/31. And I'm comparing that. Am I crazy for doing that? Or would
No.
that be a good comparison?
Yes, that is a good
Okay.
comparison.
All right. Thank you. Sorry.
Yep.
That helped me walk through some things. Sorry.
And then Jody,
Don't apologize. That's what the webinar is for. Go ahead, Tracy.
so then when you are saying that, and with taking into consideration of what Penny said, so if a person, or if the contact hour rate is say $10 an hour, okay, and per contact hour, but and so your total amount was say $1 million, okay, but when you divide it out, you can't go past that $22, right? So even though the contact hour rate may be $10, you still have to take into consideration that 22,
Yes,
and you could still be quite far in the basement as far as what your funding will be this year.
right. Essentially, it doesn't matter what the contact hour rate is if at the end, when you take all 4 components of funding that your consortium is going to get, you add them together and you divide them by your total number of contact hours generated, if that number is 22 or above, or if state statute changes, maybe it could be 28 or 30 or above. But if you're hitting that cap, it doesn't matter what the contact hour rate is, essentially. So yeah, you do have to be aware of both of those factors. Both, what is the contact hour rate? What might it end up being? Or how many, how much am I below or above statewide decline? And am I close to hitting that $22 per hour cap? Yeah, both of those pieces of information are necessary in order to make an accurate
Right.
guess of next year's
Okay.
funding. Yep.
Perfect. That's what I've been going on. So, okay.
Hey, Jody, and you probably don't like to predict this. I know Metro North is working on this, and I see somebody else predicted it too. But if hours are down 26%, I mean, we would expect the contact hour rate to go up 20% at least, right? I mean, that shouldn't be.
That's a
Yeah, you don't
super
want to say that, but
question.
I mean, because that's what I was projecting it over $9 when I was doing it myself.
Yeah, I don't personally have the right kind of a brain to actually be able
Okay.
to make a prediction in my brain. We could I think we ran a simulation. Let's move on. Let me see if I can find out what our simulation.
But the second question I have is, for all the programs that hit that, if let's say it does go from 778 to 9 something, and that pushes people over 22, where does that money go to? That, because it doesn't change the contact hour rate, so
Correct. It doesn't. That money gets taken off the top and it gets rolled back into the following year's pot of funding.
So it could increase the contact hour rate the following year potentially, because the overall amount's a little higher.
Right. It increases the overall total to be distributed out.
Okay,
in
all
fiscal year.
aspects of the formula.
Correct. It
Okay.
gets pushed back into the big pot at the beginning that then gets divided up into the 4 areas as it gets distributed out to grantees. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Jody. So you can keep your questions coming for our panelists, but we want to broaden the conversation here and hear from you. What resonated with you as we heard from our speakers, and what are you puzzling with as you're thinking about the next year? I want to go back to a comment that was shared in the chat a bit ago by Kathleen Moriarty, and invite you, if you'd like, Kathleen, to come on and talk to us a little bit about your situation where you are only down just a bit from your pre-COVID numbers, but looking at still some significant funding issues. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can just jump on. I think that, that basically captures it. I just wanted to show sort of a different picture instead of, right, which, and again, I empathize with those programs that are struggling to get students on contact hours and having that problem, but it's sort of interesting. We equally are going to face funding and service issues with the opposite problem. So I said carryover, but of course that meant Q5. So our Q5 this year, right, we were using the some funds and of course the leftover 166 funds. And then this whole year we've all been kind of saying, gosh, now is when we have the need for those 166 funds, right? Because we're having a huge demand. And I know there are other, especially metro area programs that are feeling that too. But so within our consortium at Metro North, and we're spread out quite a bit, but just the Columbia Heights site that I manage actually has the largest wait list. We're running all online classes still, and there's a big demand, and we keep trying to push them elsewhere because if we can't serve them, we want to make sure they're getting served somewhere. Right. But anyway, all that is to say that while our consortium is not down much, so we should, through all these calculations, get some increased funding. We're definitely going to hit the 11% cap, things like that. I foresee that the Columbia Heights site is still going to be struggling to serve these large wait lists. So, and I've actually been contacted by both of my school districts. So I also run the Brooklyn Center site, where they're seeing a large influx of new Spanish-speaking families, largely from Ecuador. And I'm trying to work with them on some of their K-12 century, 21st century funds to run some extra classes. But so anyway, it's a challenge. I'm so wondering if there are going to be any special funds for those that are seeing a huge demand and have kept their hours up compared to pre-COVID. Yeah.
Kathleen, a question for both you and Eric. Are you seeing, Kathleen, the same general population that Eric is with your high numbers, the low level ESL learners, or
So
across
it's
the level?
interesting, yeah. So a couple of years ago, probably right pre-COVID and then certainly into COVID, we saw a huge influx in low level, and we were at the time with extra funding, whatnot, able to add classes. So we stratified our level 1 into like 3 levels, both morning and night. And now the demand isn't just the low level, it's we're seeing it across levels.
Okay.
Our largest right now is still a low. It's a low level 2, but I did some restructuring. We added a new level 4 class. We split our level 4 into 4A, 4B so that we could serve the very large wait list that we had there. So we have, I think right now we're around 160 people on a wait list for different levels.
Wow. And you said that you've been trying to, help people find other programming. Are those folks looking specifically for online classes?
Yeah, so it's a mix. So we always ask now as they come in, because even within our consortium, we have in-person classes, and then there's also neighboring programs that are doing in-person. So if they are able and to get to an in-person and want to go to in-person, we're trying to refer them that way. And then if they want online and the class level they are placed into has a wait list, then we try, of course, to refer them to other online programs. It's interesting. So we do a lot of that. So a lot of people are referred elsewhere. And then there's a lot who still say they just want to wait for various reasons. They're most likely they're just here in the community.
Right. Great. Thank you for sharing, Kathleen. Let's see, a lot coming in the chat, and maybe Lindsay, you can help me out. I do see one question. I'll ask Jody if you can respond to Mag. Where can we find more info on what might qualify as a service disruption? I'm going to talk again just a little bit about how that's defined.
Yeah, service disruption is defined in state statute. It was written pre-COVID, so FYI. Essentially, it is something that was out of control of the program or the entity that received the fund. So it can't be like a decision, if you are a school district, it can't be because of a decision that the school district made. But I think it, it could be because a tornado, I think that the original scenario it was envisioned for was a tornado flattens the building or something. So I'll put a link into the chat to the state statute if you'd like to read that delightful language.
Thank you. Let's see. I don't know if Susie or someone else from Literacy Action Network wants to comment on Kirsten's comment from a while back around efforts to raise the cap and.
Yep. Astrid, I just put that in a note for Scott and I to discuss and get back to her. So
okay.
I did not ignore that.
Okay. Thank you. A question from Laura. What are some perspectives about possible program mergers or ideas to help smaller programs from having to have limited staff responsible for every demand? So I'm not sure who your question is directed at, Laura, whether you're just looking for other programs to chime in on what they're thinking, or whether that is a strategy for dealing with growing responsibility. Anybody with great ideas, please chime in. Lindsay, have we missed?
Well, I don't know what Laura's really necessarily looking at, but I'm a smaller program down in Albert Lea, and what has really helped us is we with our transition money, we have opened up all our transition classes into the high flex model. And that has made a huge difference because I can't hardly find teachers right now. So not every program is finding a teacher. And that has really made a big difference. And also obviously promoting the classes that are open statewide, but that has really helped. It's driving my data person crazy because we have, all these classes, but that has really helped as far as getting some hours. And then another big one has been our partnership with our community college and co-teaching some of those classes. That has been a lifesaver too. But I really think looking at your consortium money and having all those classes be taught high flex has been a really lifesaver for a lot of our programs in our consortium.
Thank you, Penny.
And for those, if you are watching the recording, I just want to mention a comment as well that was made over considering numbers within the consortium's organizations, how that's going to impact individual programs, et cetera. And Jody's just encouraging, like, if that's you and trying to, it's almost feels impossible to estimate like what that impact is going to be. And so reaching out to consortium leadership and discussing what the plans are at the consortium level could be really helpful in that situation. And yeah, any other questions that you have around budgeting and thinking about next year, concerns? We don't want to keep you longer than we need to be here, but we carved out this space if there are additional questions or concerns you want to raise.
I'm going to ask another question about the cap again. Sorry to go back to this because I know you've already answered it, but I just want to make sure that I wrap my head around this. So if we are already, hitting our 22 and we're capped at that, because I guess before what I was thinking, okay, if the state was down 27%, and let's say, I'm just going to use numbers here to make it easy. And let's say my consortium is down 50%. And that funding, there's going to be more, but if we're already capped at our 22, it's just going to be the contact hours times the 22. There isn't going to be that additional funding, even though the state is down 27%, that's not going to get spread out. It would if we weren't at our cap, but if we're at our cap, just that's it. It's the 22 times our contact hours. I understand the entitlements and the other areas connected to that, but if we're capped at 22, we're capped, like we can't do any more unless it gets uncapped by the legislation. Would that be correct?
That's correct, Jessica. So basically that calculation of whether or not you're hitting the $22 per cap, it happens at the very end. It happens after we have distributed out, all into the 4 different buckets.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's no more recourse. There's nothing else that happens at that point. So if you are already currently, so it sounds like you're in a similar situation to Tracy.
I am,
yes. Right? If you're
yes.
currently capped and you have fewer hours this year than the amount of hours you're capped on currently, then yeah, it is a reasonable assumption that your funding for the upcoming year is going to be the current number of hours, or the hours that you end up generating in the current contact hour reporting period times 22, unless there's a change at the legislature, then it might be times 30. But yep, you're thinking of it right. Okay,
I just wanted to make sure that. And then I know that you were talking about the dates. When exactly will we find out by the legislature? Is there a hard date? I heard that there's 13 steps to get it through, but when will we know this?
I mean, so we're talking about, we're talking about the legislative session, right? We're talking about the House of Representatives and the state senators, passing a bill and sending it to the governor's office for him to sign it. So I know they don't work that way on deadlines, but I think if the session is, if it's a regular session, if it doesn't go long, sessions end usually May, is that right?
Yeah, Nathan.
They just put May 22nd.
May 22nd.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So in theory, we should have an answer by May 22nd. But occasionally they call a special session and there could be answers later than that. But and then possible they might finish up their work sooner than May 22nd. But May would probably be the most realistic time that we would know. I wouldn't expect that we would know before then.
And then what can we do to help this? What specific steps can we do?
With Susie.
Commercial back to Susie.
Yes.
So great question. We had our Literacy Action Network board retreat this morning. And so you will be hearing from Wendy and from IMABE, who is a great advocacy group. And we're formulating all the main platform points, and we have links to tell you who is on the education committee, who might be working with education in your specific area that you live or that you work. So stay tuned to that, and we'll have some points for you to include in letters and communication. So I love that you asked. Don't forget to ask again. We're just making sure that everything is buttoned up tight so we have an educated, thorough, concise message coming from all ABE practitioners.
Thank
How
you.
was that? I tried.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so a couple more comments and then I think we're going to move towards wrapping things up. Back to Laura and her question around or her response to Penny's idea about opening up regional classes. Just that also may be a challenge because her students are struggling with class attendance and attending online and not even attending consistently face-to-face. So an issue to continue grappling with. And then Kirsten said, commented on one of the strategies she's using this year for the first time ever. I'm considering strategically saving every dime of the 20% carryover allowed to be used in Q5 to pad the losses we will likely encounter next year. It might be the one thing that buys us another year to turn the ship around and wait on the legislature to address the cap issues. Okay, well, I want to thank our panelists so much for sharing their thinking and planning. I think it really helps to hear some concrete examples of how people are approaching this tough puzzle. And huge thanks to my colleague Jody for sharing her wisdom and expertise around the funding formula to help folks be thinking about that. Turn things back over to Lindsay.
Yeah, just a couple comments as we wrap up here. The next webinar directed specifically towards administrators and managers, although anyone can attend, will be coming up shortly here, just in about a month, February 21st. It will be an hour. We extended this conversation to be an hour and a half if it needed to be, just because budgeting, right? But it'll be an hour and we're going to focus on making it work, creative programming solutions shared from different adult ed managers across the state. So you won't want to miss that. And then in the follow-up email from Atlas, you will receive a PDF of these slides. You'll receive the manager meeting slideshow. You'll receive the recording of this webinar, and then the CEUs will be embedded in the webinar evaluation. And we've already given you a couple of those links in the chat now. The evaluation that has the CEUs, and then the manager meeting slideshow we referred to at the beginning. But you will also receive them in an email along with the slides from today and the recording. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your thoughts and concerns and questions. We'll stick around for a few minutes if you have any last comments. Otherwise, have a good rest of your day.